Welcome, everybody, to this virtual meeting of the Sexual Violence Prevention Network. My name is Julia Tyndall. I'm the Minnesota Department of Health Sexual Violence Prevention Program Planner, and co-hosting with me today is Hunter Beckstrom. For anyone who needs captions, you can turn on the live transcript at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to chat Mencasa tech support or one of the hosts to access those captions, or if you have other tech needs.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Hunter Beckstrom. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I am the Prevention Program Coordinator with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Also on our planning committee are Jude Foster from the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Mary Hopkins and Marissa Regay at the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank you to everybody for helping to put this together today. For those new to these meetings, we host 4 quarterly SVPN meetings a year, and we have 3 goals for the Sexual Violence Prevention Network. First, we want to build understanding for primary prevention of sexual violence. Primary prevention is the proactive steps taken so that violence does not occur in the first place. And the most effective prevention solutions create a culture that does not tolerate violence of any kind. Culture is constantly changing, and we can impact it for the better by changing policies, practices, and environments in the places where we live, learn, work, and play. So during these meetings, we present a wide array of sexual violence topics, and we always connect it back to the primary prevention of sexual violence.
Yes, and however, this doesn't mean that we forget about victims and survivors, because at the center of all of our work are the voices and needs of those victims and survivors, whether we are doing direct services, systems change work, or prevention. And all of these pieces are equally important in our work, and all levels need to exist in order to move change forward while still supporting those most impacted by sexual violence. And our second goal is to share resources related to sexual violence prevention. So we're going to share some resources during our meeting today and also share additional events, updates, and other resources on the Sexual Violence Prevention Network mailing list, which happens to go every 2 weeks. Additionally, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or Mencasa, also shares prevention resources on the Mencasa prevention email list. And finally, we also encourage you to sign up for updates from Prevent Connect to stay connected on a national level for prevention as well. Finally, our presentations are recorded and archived on Mencasa's YouTube to access following our meetings.
And our third goal is about connection. We hope this space is helpful for you to connect with other people interested in sexual violence prevention. So to help us connect to each other, we would love to hear from you in the chat box. Please share your name, your pronouns, and one word to describe how you're feeling today. Part of our goals in SVPN is to spur networking and connections, and we hope you can connect with each other today using the chat box throughout the presentations. So while people take a second to introduce themselves and come up with a word, Hunter, what is your word for today?
I would say at first I actually had a meeting this morning. I was like, oh my goodness, this is like the Monday of all Mondays for me so far. But I think now that we've kind of gotten into this space, I'm like really excited and jazzed to hear from some of our presenters today. So I think a variety of emotions, but definitely feeling excited for this presentation so far.
Nice.
Looks like we got other folks sharing too. So we got someone who's feeling a little bit tired, happy, caffeinated. Yes, I love that. I'm definitely gonna have to get some more coffee after this. Energized, curious, tired again. So yeah, a huge spectrum of folks too. I don't know if you're seeing anything that's resonating with you, Julia.
Oh yeah, I see alive. Totally. Yes. Motivated. I'm definitely feeling energized this morning. It's a good morning. I'm a morning person though. So I know that that's not everybody's jam, but I'm there.
I like that someone said sore from pickleball yesterday. That sounds like it must have been a lot of fun. Huh? Enthusiastic and awake. All right. Well, thanks so much, folks, for being able to share a little bit on in the chat. Please feel free to share a little bit more as folks either come on into this space or you kind of discover that you're having a different feeling throughout the meeting today. But we do sincerely hope that you'll use today as an opportunity to meet some new folks and also create some new connections. And before we actually get started today, just wanted to share a couple of housekeeping pieces. So first of all, please keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking. Additionally, there is a raise your hand feature on Zoom. So if we do happen to have a few different folks wanting to share at one time, we do ask you to use this function and then we will call on you to unmute yourself. And then of course, if you do have any comments, questions, or pieces that really just resonated with you throughout our presentation today, please go ahead and throw that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And I think we're ready to get started with the first part of our presentation today. So during the first part of our meeting, MDH and Mencasa are going to be sharing updates on how our respective agencies have responded to current events. First, it is my pleasure to welcome Beatriz Menanto, the Violence Prevention Programs Unit Supervisor at the Minnesota Department of Health. Welcome, Beatriz. I will spotlight you just as soon as I find you.
Hi there. Thank you so much.
There we go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share today and to participate in this meeting. I always enjoy them, so it's good to be a part of it, and excited to share a little bit about some information from MDH on the issue of reproductive health care in Minnesota. I'm going to, is this a good time for me to share then the screen? Is that time? Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to give this a go. Keep my fingers crossed. Does that look like it's working? Okay, I see some nods too. Excellent, excellent. So one of the benefits of having the Sexual Violence Prevention Network be sort of co-hosted by state agency, MDH, and Mencasa is that we all have different roles to play. And so I can share a little bit from the government perspective and that approach, and sort of share some of the information that has come out since the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs, and some of the information that's out there that's supported by MDH and other state agencies, as well as the governor's office. So we'll start with that that information here with the governor's office. So in June, right after the decision, the Supreme Court decision, the Governor Wilson, Lieutenant Flanagan, they, issued a statement saying that they do support access to reproductive health care for all Minnesotans, and that they acknowledge that the decision of the Supreme Court was disappointing and painful to many. Also acknowledging that this isn't a one size fits all. Not everybody feels the same on this issue. It is a very powerful, intense issue. It just so happens that our governor's position was, sharing that this decision of the Supreme Court, it was important to share that this doesn't change people's rights in Minnesota under the Minnesota Constitution, but acknowledging that the rights for people in other states might be impacted by the Supreme Court decision, and then the decisions that their state is taking after that, including some neighboring states. So the governor's response was on June 25th, they issued an executive order that you can find via Googling Executive Order 2216, or it's also accessible via the MDH website. And it says a number of things, but three main takeaways for us at MDH was that it really is requiring state agencies to use our authority to work together to find opportunities that protect Minnesotans providing or seeking reproductive health care. So this broad issue of reproductive health care that includes many things, including abortion access. It also directed MDH, along with DHS, to provide and produce a report that outlined the safety and importance of reproductive health care in Minnesota. It identified that to the maximum extent allowed by law. So within the confines of law, that state agencies shouldn't be using their resources to help in investigations that impose sanctions on activities in accessing reproductive health care that would be legal in Minnesota. It also indicated that that there would be legal discretion used to decline extradition of people who are charged under other state laws for penalizing behavior, and that though their laws criminalize providing, seeking, or obtaining reproductive health care, that we wouldn't be extraditing. So sort of outlining that what's legal in Minnesota still remains legal, and that resources won't be used for extraditing people and for penalizing people who are coming from other states as well, that where that right has been impacted. Another layer here is the direction from our Commissioner of Health for Minnesota Department of Health. And this was a statement, an email that was issued to all of our state employees or MDH employees, outlining this executive order, the position of the governor, excuse me, and really then informing us and clarifying for us our role and position of MDH as a state agency, and therefore our state staff roles as well. So really acknowledging that not everybody feels the same about this issue, and that despite your personal opinions on the issue of abortion access and reproductive care access, et cetera, that we adhere as state employees and as part of a state agency to the Minnesota Constitution and the laws within that identify our obligations of public servants. So identifying specifically that this executive order of 2216 clarifies our responsibilities to people or entities that provide, assist, seek, or obtain lawful reproductive health care in Minnesota. So really clarifying our role as state agencies, as representatives of state agencies, and as connections to the governor. If that position changes, obviously our position, adjusts. But for now, this is the directive from our governor's office for us within state agencies. So another resource that outlines this information is our website within MDH. It's a Minnesota Constitution and Abortion. You can find it with a quick Google search of MDH, Minnesota Constitution and Abortion. And this contains some clarifying information that was sort of, questioned with the Supreme Court decision. How does the Supreme Court decision affect states? How does it affect Minnesota? How does it impact our own decision in Minnesota, the Constitution and the Supreme Court of Minnesota deciding that the access and the right to an abortion? And so it clarifies under the law what the law is in Minnesota. And you could see the quote here, but really identifying clearly that choosing to have an abortion is a right. It's separate and independent from the U.S. Constitution, that it doesn't, the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs doesn't change the Minnesota Constitution. It doesn't change the Supreme Court decision under Doe versus Gomez. And so therefore it doesn't change Minnesota's laws that are regulating, and it remains legal in Minnesota. This website provides a number of other resources. It includes the report that I'll mention, that'll go into a little bit more detail, that was directed by the executive order, but it also provides some public health information about public health care programs that do cover abortion services. It provides information on a woman's right to know, and some required information that is required to be shared with individuals, birthing people who are seeking reproductive health care. And it does provide some information about a positive alternative program that is meant to support and assist carrying pregnancies to term through assistance to families and other support. It also provides some information on what information is required for reporting on induced abortion within Minnesota. So it is a resource to sort of dig in and find some more information about the status of reproductive health care in Minnesota. It also provides the link to the report that was required under the Executive Order of 2216. The report is called A Summary of Findings, Safety, Effectiveness, and Importance of Abortion Care in Minnesota. So while the executive order was broad about reproductive health care, the report did focus on abortion care and specifically addressing unintended pregnancies as well. It provides some data, as Minnesota often reports on abortion access and reproductive health care in Minnesota, provides some more recent data. It identified that abortion care is actually, it was determined to be a low-risk medical procedure. And this isn't just an analysis or something that is an opinion. This is based on a number of factors, including CDC's analysis and their sort of equation that identifying that since 1970s, there's been fewer than one maternal death per 1,000 abortions. And so therefore it's identified, it fits into this category. And so just understanding that that status or that equation was used to identify its safety. It also identified that there's been a decrease in numbers from 1980 to 2021, that the majority are provided to Minnesota residents as well. We have a lower rate than the national rate in Minnesota. It also identifies that the unplanned pregnancies is at least over half of the reason that people give for accessing abortion care, at least in 2021. And so therefore the report focused on unplanned pregnancies. And it acknowledged that abortion care is less accessible to some, both rural folk, but also sort of those non-geographic barriers that to healthcare in general that impact us, a cost of care, transportation, time off of work, childcare, and we acknowledged that those barriers impact populations differently depending on other resources and a marginalization of certain populations that already exist. It explored key strategies to prevent and reduce unintended pregnancies. It also acknowledged this need for equitable access, as well as the influence that structural inequities have on healthcare outcomes overall, that this doesn't exist in isolation, it exists within that reality. One of the things that to connect it to this meeting is really this, that we were able to provide for this report within our violence prevention programs unit, is an acknowledgement that reproductive health care is very important to violence prevention, that it's a vital piece of violence prevention. And so the report does include information and sort of sources that support this idea that reproductive health care is a form of violence prevention, in that many victim survivors experience unintended pregnancy as a result of the violence that they endure, along with other negative healthcare health outcomes. Sort of, it acknowledged the violence prevention link on two fronts. One being that access to reproductive health care is important for violence prevention because of these issues listed, that pregnancy itself can be a risk factor, that access is important for preventing domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. That was really the focus, given the focus of our violence prevention programs unit. It addressed the issue of reproductive coercion that you'll be hearing more about today. And it acknowledged that restrictive laws or any fear of reprisal, or it limits the access to care, especially for certain populations that are already disproportionately represented in criminal justice systems or already marginalized from healthcare access. So it also states and acknowledges that access to care provides options, resources, and the autonomy to interrupt and prevent forms of violence. And then it also looks at this from a different framing, a different lens, that violence prevention itself is a strategy to prevent and reduce unintended pregnancies. Along with other strategies noted were family planning services, comprehensive sexual education, and access to self-abortion care itself. It acknowledged that creating sort of those elements of violence prevention and changing culture are a form of reducing unintended pregnancies, creating safe and equitable environments in schools, workplaces, in our communities, and that change in culture towards an intolerance of violence. It promoted the economic supports to families, as well as teaching skills to prevent violence, and sort of that healthy relationships building, it supporting that comprehensive sex ed and social emotional learning as well. I'm really focusing on community-driven, culturally relevant programs that shift this culture in a culturally relevant way, and then providing healing-centered services, including reproductive health care, along with safety planning, housing, and other resources as well. So those are some of the layers from the governor's office down through MDH. And then you, through this more recent report, there's a lot of other resources on the website that I encourage you to sort of look through and read this report, as well as some of the other resources there. So that's my information. You could reach me directly. I will stop sharing now and go back to the group. There we go. Did that work?
Yes, thank you so very much, Beatriz. I think that was immensely helpful, just being able to look at multiple different perspectives of the role and position about, the governor's role in this space, and then obviously you all at MDH, and then looking forward to in a little bit here, hearing from folks at both Women's Advocates and Mencasa as well. But just wanted to check in to see if any of our participants today had any questions for Beatriz or anything like that. Just wanted to give a moment. And I do highly recommend checking out some of those reports that were shared in the chat as well. Thanks to Mary and Julia for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those in the chat. Appreciate it.
I'll just give it about 30 seconds. I know it always takes me a while just to think and then write up my question in case folks are doing that in the chat. All right, well, if not, if anything does come up, please don't hesitate to share that in the chat. Just want to say thank you again so much, Beatriz, for sharing that information. And then I know that you had also shared your email address in that presentation as well. But with that, wanted to move on to our next person that is going to share some information today. And so I just wanted to introduce you to Sarah Florman, the Public Policy Manager at Mencasa. And Sarah's going to speak a little bit about the Dobbs decision and other relevant statewide policy information. Welcome, Sarah.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I have a co-host today. This is Riri. He is very happy to be here as well. So as most of you know, on June 24th, my birthday, the Supreme Court came down with the Dobbs decision. It was not a fun gift, which really did just sort of upend a lot of the legal norms and precedents that most of us are used to. So one of what I will say is that Minnesota does have the constitutional protection for abortion. In 1995, they ruled on a case called Doe v. Gomez that access to abortion is a constitutional right. So that is something that is upheld in Minnesota. One of the things that we have been doing at Mencasa is working with folks in coalitions in the Midwest. So we have been having monthly meetings with other Midwest sexual assault coalitions since I think June, May or June. So that's Wisconsin, North Dakota, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Ohio have been attending and just really getting updates on what's going on in other states. What things look like on the ground there, and then trying to figure out how we can provide whatever support is needed for those coalitions and their programs. Right now, Minnesota and Illinois are kind of the only two states that have access. The other states don't all have outright bans, but they do have really severe restrictions and limitations. So just keeping kind of an update on what's going on in the Midwest and trying to ensure that in Minnesota, we're able to respond to those folks as well as they're coming in from out of state, which we know has already been happening. We've already had, oh, sorry. He was about to do some very weird things to my computer. Okay. As we've already had some folks coming in from states like Texas, where other bans have been put in place previously. So we know that that's only going to increase. One bit of good news is that there was a recent Ramsey District Court ruling that really did kind of undo a lot of the restrictions that we've had here in Minnesota restricting abortion access. The court ruled that many of these restrictions violate the state constitution. So restrictions, a lot of these are restrictions we've had in place for a really long time that a lot of people don't know about until they're seeking reproductive health care, and then coming up against these barriers that were pretty significant. So some of the restrictions that were removed are a requirement for second trimester abortions to be performed in a hospital, the requirement for healthcare providers to give an informed consent statement, two-parent notification for minors, which was really problematic. It required a lot of paperwork and legwork on the behalf of minors trying to get proof of parentage, proof of death or loss of parents, court orders to override these things, all of this. They also removed the restriction allowing only physicians to perform abortions. That's going to be really huge in terms of access, particularly for medication-assisted abortions. If folks who are not physicians can be providing those, which is a pretty typical thing. There's a lot of medications that non-physicians are able to provide already. That's really going to increase access. They've also removed the 24-hour waiting period that was in place for abortions. So what's still required is reporting data to the state, but they did remove the felony penalties for providers who fail to report data. There is also in place still a requirement that fetal tissue be disposed of by burial or cremation. What happens in these decisions is that the Ramsey County District Court basically challenged the state, and the state chose, when this decision came down, not to appeal it. So Attorney General Keith Ellison said, nope, we're not going to appeal this decision. We see that as being kind of an unnecessary expense based on information we have from the folks in Minnesota. It's not something that they want, so we're going to just let this be. So as of this ruling, basically all of these restrictions no longer exist across the state. Providers are able to start doing these things kind of immediately at the level of comfort that they have. There's a lot of kind of background and work and training and prep that's going to have to be done in order for some of these things to be widespread, but that's something everybody is looking forward to doing. There is a recent Traverse County attorney challenge. So the county attorney in Traverse County, which is a small county, I knew where it was a minute ago, but now I don't. I apologize, Traverse County. I don't know where you are. They are basically questioning whether or not a district court ruling is applicable to the entire state of Minnesota. So that question went into court last week. We will keep you posted on what we find out. The folks at Gender Justice are doing a lot of work in that area, kind of defending this decision. So, all right, so that's what's up with that. Mencasa has kind of done a lot of things. Ashley's going to talk a lot about Mencasa's stance on reproductive justice and some of the work that we've been doing, but we really firmly believe that victim survivors should have access to all of the options that are available, whatever that means. We feel really strongly that all people have the right to parent or not parent in the manner that they choose, and bodily autonomy is really critical to that. So One of the things that has happened in recent weeks is that there have been some really harmful comments made publicly by some kind of important folks. There is an election going on, so it's been a really interesting time. Comments that I think we're hearing across the country, but were happening in Minnesota for sure, are questions about, well, exceptions for rape and incest, is that okay? Is that, is that an acceptable exclusion? Is that something that we even want to talk about? Questions about that exception coming up of like, how do you prove rape or incest? Just really kind of harmful questions for victim survivors in general. Questions about some of these are kind of upsetting to me, so I apologize in advance, but things like two wrongs don't make a right, questioning our society's culture of encouraging women to go to work and that encouraging abortions, women and other agencies using the rape card anytime questions of reproductive access come up, and some comments comparing abortion to slavery. Mencasa feels really strongly that these comments are really harmful, not only to victim survivors, but to all folks who need access to reproductive health care. So we did participate in a press conference hosted by Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. She had a couple victim survivors who came and they told really meaningful stories about their experiences and how their need for reproductive health care was part of their healing process. And then Mencasa, our executive director, Artika Roller, spoke about our stance on the issue, on these comments, and on our support for victim survivors to have those rights to kind of make whatever decisions they need to for their own well-being. And I think I might have covered everything, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. Again, if folks do have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to throw that in the chat. But just want to validate everything that Sarah was saying, talking about some of those policy level reactions that Mencasa has had and how we are really trying to work towards supporting some of this work. And just want to take a peek in the chat really quick. So it does look like we have a question. Katie is asking, who was the audience for that meeting with Penny Flanagan, and was it for legislators?
I'm not entirely sure where it was broadcast, but it was for the general public of Minnesota.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Kelly, for asking. And yes, just uplift what Sandy is sharing in the chat. Want to validate all the experiences and feelings and just being that it was incredibly meaningful too. So thank you so much, Sarah. If folks do have any other questions, please do not hesitate to throw that in the chat. But next, I want to take some time to introduce to everyone Ashley Stewart-Griffith, and Ashley is the Senior Advocacy Coordinator at Mencasa. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks, Hunter. Good morning, everyone. Like Hunter said, I'm the Senior Advocacy Coordinator at Mencasa. So what my role is to support our members who are advocates. So I've been working with my colleagues at Mencasa to provide resources and points of connection for sexual assault advocates around the issue of abortion, but also reproductive health care more broadly. Even though we do have abortion's not accessible to everybody in Minnesota, but comparatively, we do have a landscape that allows for folks to receive care better than some other states. So this really has been, the overturning of Roe v. Wade has really brought up some important conversations. And so we wanted to be able to meet our membership and to be able to provide resources to all of them. Also want to, and I know Sarah talked some about this, so I don't want to repeat too much, but just to kind of ground the issue. So we at Mencasa realize that not every advocate is going to be pro-choice, personally, but do expect that because abortion is legal and safe in the state of Minnesota, that it is an option for victim survivors, and it is an option that we really want to work with advocates to make sure that they are able to discuss the option of abortion with the victim survivors that they are supporting. And so do you want to, what we have found to be helpful is kind of grounding the issue in reproductive justice, bodily autonomy, and also considering rape-related pregnancies as well. So we are not, I think we have some work to do to become a reproductive justice organization, but we do support the reproductive justice framework that everyone should have the ability to parent or not parent when they want to, and parent in the ways that and support folks in their ability in becoming a parent as well. Also want to acknowledge too that, you know, this issue does transcend broader than choice, that it is also a social justice issue as well. Also want to frame the discussion in like bodily autonomy as well. So understanding that victim survivors have the right to make decisions about their own bodies, and that can include continuing or not continuing pregnancy. And also wanting to uphold abortion care and access, because we do know that some victim survivors do experience rape-related pregnancies. And oftentimes this is in the context of reproductive coercion. So I guess I will let Brennison talk more about that. But just wanting to kind of go back to like the reason that Mencasa is doing work around abortion and accessing abortion care for those who need it is because of reproductive justice framework about supporting people's bodily autonomy, and also acknowledging that there are rape-related pregnancies as well. So I'll talk some about the actual events and resources that we have created for our members. So the first is that we co-hosted a grieving space for the joint membership of all the sibling coalitions in Minnesota. So that was really space for people to come and to grieve. So those who are grieving the overturning of Roe v. Wade can come, and we provide support to each other and listen to one another about our reflections on the overturning. Another thing we have done is we've created a reproductive health care page on our webpage. So there's a lot of information here that I want to share with you that we hope can be helpful to folks as you are providing resources in your community. Also did a webinar entitled "What Minnesota Advocates Need to Know About Abortion." So that was an unrecorded webinar that I did a couple weeks ago, but I did want to let folks know that we are planning on doing a recorded version that will be accessible to our members as well. But through this webinar, we talked about the landscape of abortion care since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and also with the recent district court ruling as well, like what the abortion landscape is here. And that includes listing the abortion providers, so folks are knowledgeable about where care can be accessed in Minnesota. Also discussed crisis pregnancy centers and how to distinguish a crisis pregnancy center from an abortion provider, and to understand when what a referral to a crisis pregnancy center would look like, and what are some kind of concerns, and when it may be appropriate and when it is not appropriate to be making that referral. Understanding abortion basics. So we discussed like emergency contraception and how it's different than the abortion pills, discussed pregnancy, how it happens, how to detect a pregnancy, talked about the different types of abortion care, and then also discussed how to pay for an abortion. And then we also talked about the specifics around the specific advocacy skills around providing support to a victim survivor who may need to access an abortion. So perhaps it's specific safety planning. So if someone's living with an abusive person, like how do they obtain care in the safest way possible, doing some emotional safety planning with victim survivors as well, and also understanding the resources that are available for people, whether it's other support groups that are aligned with this issue. So again, just making referrals in the community and what resources are available. And then we had some interactive scenarios as well. Like I said, I will be recording a version of this. And so if you are interested in accessing that, or if you're interested in having a live conversation too, I mean, that's something that I'd be happy to discuss further with you all. And so Sarah, I saw that you put a link in. I just want to make sure there were, two links I wanted to share. Oh, you shared both of them. Sarah, you read my mind.
Sorry.
No,
Faster
no.
than you.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. And then one thing I also wanted to talk about is, and we've gotten a lot of questions about kind of the more like macro things that people can do around increasing access to abortion care. And so I know Sarah talked some about that and how we'll continue to educate elected officials on this issue, but also just like stressing the importance of being involved, and just there are elections coming up, and to be just an informed citizen around who's running for office and where what folks are supporting and what they're not supporting. And so we have created some content, and this is what I'm sharing here is content about the primary elections, which have passed, but we hope to be creating material around the general election too. And again, this just is a way to be knowledgeable about your elected officials and what they're supporting and not supporting. Yeah, I think that does it for the stuff that Mencasa has been working on. Just wondering if folks have questions for me or for Sarah. Or Sarah, if I forgot something.
Thanks, Ashley. And like Hunter did earlier, we'll give folks just a couple seconds to think about it. I know that the information that Beatriz and Sarah and Ashley have shared is a lot to take in. Some of it is incredibly technical and just a great deal to absorb. So just want to share again a lot of gratitude to the three of you for providing these updates for our respective agencies. And it sounds like folks can reach out if they have additional questions or want to be able to touch base with you in person or virtually, I mean, one-on-one. And the question in the chat is, will the recording of that additional training be sent through the SVPN listserv? Will that be available to send out?
Yeah, we can certainly send it out. It might be one of those things that is only going to at first be accessible to our members, but if you want access to it, I'd be happy to figure out a way to get you access to it if you're not at Mencasa, which I think Women's at, I think you are. So yes, it will be.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you again to Sarah for sharing these important insights and updates with us. And next on our agenda, we are so excited to welcome Brennison Wheeler from Women's Advocates. Brennison will be presenting today on the dynamics and levels of reproductive coercion. Brennison is the Community Education and Outreach Manager at Women's Advocates, one of the nation's first domestic violence shelters located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Her educational background includes a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Minnesota and several years of research experience studying and presenting on identity, mental health, marginalization, and trauma. Brennison provides presentations, trainings, and workshops in the community and online to support Women's Advocates' mission of walking with victim survivors and our community to break the cycle of domestic violence. Brennison began working at Women's Advocates in April 2019 and has reached thousands of community members, professionals, and students within the state of Minnesota and beyond. And with that, we are so grateful to have you, Brennison. Welcome and take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Julia, for that introduction. A little bit more about me and as it relates to reproductive coercion. I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. And so one of my first jobs was actually working at the Community University Healthcare Center. Many of you may know it as Kook Clinic. And I was the Family Planning Special Projects Coordinator. So I had an introduction to this kind of work pretty early on before I graduated college. And I have found myself kind of circling back to this as being an issue that I am very passionate about and how I have seen it be inextricably connected to the work that I do now at Women's Advocates. And so with that, I wanted to share a little bit more if folks don't know about Women's Advocates. So we are one of the first domestic violence shelters in the United States. We were founded in 1974, and we started out as a crisis line 2 years prior. It was really a legal helpline to support people on navigating divorce at that time, because Minnesota was at the front lines of the no-fault divorce law of, being able to get a divorce without, just because you want to. And a lot of people don't know that that was something that is pretty recent still in our history. But since then, almost 50 years of doing this work, we've evolved a lot to expand our continuum of safety. So a lot of us may know us for our shelter work and our advocacy work. And our first point of contact is usually that crisis line. But we have a continuum of safety. So a lot of you are working in violence prevention. And so that is where my work lives. And I can talk a little bit more about our programming later at the end, but we'll focus more on reproductive coercion today. And then we also support with housing stability after folks have left our shelter as well. So if you're interested in learning more about our organization, you can look at that website on the link. But I will go ahead and kind of introduce this topic a bit more. And the lovely presenters before me set a really great foundation and framework for talking about reproductive coercion. And I'll start with just a couple of statistics. And so, as I mentioned before, we know that reproductive coercion is inextricably linked with intimate partner violence, interpersonal violence, sexual assault. And this term was actually coined pretty recently by Elizabeth Miller in 2010. So it was just 12 years ago where the first research paper was written, and I can include this link in the chat. It's this systematic review of reproductive coercion, and that came out in 2017. And so it is similar to domestic violence, where there was more movements happening in the 70s. We know that domestic violence has been happening for far longer than the 70s. And that same kind of concept is applied to reproductive coercion as well. As while we didn't have a term coined for it until 2010, it was absolutely happening far before that. And so there are some statistics on the screen to kind of ground us in how prevalent the issue of reproductive coercion is and how it's connected to experiencing abuse as well. And so many of you may know that homicide is the leading cause of death among pregnant women or pregnant people. and that more than 320,000 pregnant women were abused by their partners each year and have a 37% higher risk of developing obstetric complications. So there's a lot of different stats on the screen too. One that particularly stands out to me is that 34% of survivors report that their abusive partners limited their childbearing decision. And we know that with all of these statistics reporting, there's a lot of obstacles and barriers to being able to do that. So the statistics actually might be higher than they're presented here. But some people might be surprised to know that 1 in 6 survivors are first abused during pregnancy. So they can have their relationship for however long that duration was prior and experience abuse for the first time while they're pregnant. And so there is this link between reproductive coercion and domestic violence and intimate partner violence as well too. And so one thing that I really want to emphasize as well too is that any and all genders, anyone can and do experience and perpetrate reproductive coercion. So this is, includes heterosexual, LGBTQ relationships that are sexual or romantic in nature. And the thing that I think we don't always think about too is how domestic violence has that intimate piece of it. Can be a parent, it can be a family member, it can be people that live in your home. And so these are also people who can perpetrate reproductive coercion. And we have had, I've had plenty of experience, unfortunately, with people who are experiencing reproductive coercion at the hands of their own parents as adult children, and saying that I'm being told that I will be disowned if I don't choose a certain pregnancy outcome, or just other. So that's just something that I want to include in that dynamic too, just as family members can perpetuate sexual assault, they can also engage in reproductive coercive behaviors as well too. And so one thing that I wanted to mention as well too, and I know the disparities were mentioned earlier, is that reproductive autonomy, and I'm going to quote from this article, I'll put it in the chat, but it's squarely a matter of racial equality. So Dorothy Roberts argues that in Killing the Black Body, when governments perpetuate racial subordination through the denial of procreative rights, it threatens both racial equality and privacy at once. And so in the past and today, the government has forced sterilization and contraception on Black, Indigenous, and other women of color, as well as women with disabilities, and enforced policies that broke up or limited families. Government control over reproductive decisions reinforces legal, social, and economic inferiority. So constitutional and statutory law is clear that laws discriminating on the basis of pregnancy can constitute discrimination on the basis of sex, and sex classifications that perpetuate the second-class status of women or are based on stereotypes about men, women, or traditional gender roles, including stereotypes about women's ability to make their own decisions, are legally invalid. So I'll include that source if you want to, if that piques your interest at all and you want to learn more, I'll include that link in the chat as well too. But I thought that was important to mention and name that reproductive coercive on this government level has been happening to marginalized communities far beyond and before the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So I just wanted to name that. And also just name that inclusive language really doesn't matter, that everyone deserves bodily and reproductive autonomy. And so that includes literally everyone, right? And so it's not just people who can get pregnant are impacted by these laws and these decisions. It's not necessarily anyone with a uterus. There's plenty of people who have a uterus and are physiologically unable to get pregnant for a myriad of reasons. Not everyone with a uterus is a woman. Some are girls. They're literal children who are impacted. Some are non-binary. Some are intersex. So just increased visibility for those folks and centering them in these conversations are really important too. And I thought that was important to name as an organization coming from women's advocates. So I don't think we'll have time for this. Actually, I'm a bit of a talker, as you can tell. So I will just allow you all to think about this. Maybe you can put it in the chat, but I won't launch the Mencasa. Even though I love these, I think it's a great visual. But with the topic of reproductive autonomy, I wanted you all to just think about what it means to you personally and what words you associate with reproductive autonomy and how you think we all can promote reproductive autonomy. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up, and you'll see that I'll put a lot of parallels between reproductive coercion and reproductive autonomy, is because when you Google reproductive coercion, there are thousands of links and definitions and examples that come up. But when you Google reproductive autonomy, less comes up. And what does come up usually mentions the absence of reproductive coercion and doesn't really name what the presence of certain things are with this. So I'm going to look at the chat. Some people are saying that they associate reproductive autonomy with decision, with respect, and with safety. Those are all really great. So thank you for that. So to kind of compare these two side by side, there's this definition of reproductive coercion, very broad, of behaviors aimed to maintain power and control over someone's reproductive health and reproductive choices. And there's this reproductive coercion wheel. If some of you haven't, I know many of you have probably heard of the power and control wheel, but they have adapted it to include specifically about reproductive coercion. And then reproductive autonomy can be defined as individuals' ability to be fully empowered agents in their reproductive needs and decisions, and to access reproductive health services without interference or coercion. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the text if you want to read more on that. I really do view myself as someone who gathers a lot of resources and research from people who are doing incredible work and elevates it and tries to synthesize it in a way that is easy to understand. Not everyone has the time to read dozens of pages of literature, so I want to try to make it really accessible for all of you to engage in this information. And I did also want to name that I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm not, the top expert in this field. So I'm going to include a lot of resources at the end too for certain agencies within Minnesota and within the United States and internationally as well that have dedicated their lives to this work as well too. So I just wanted to name that. So just to dive a little bit deeper into reproductive coercion, there are different types of reproductive coercion, and those are categorized as birth control, sabotage, pregnancy pressure, pregnancy outcome control, and then there's other tactics related to emotional tactics, economic tactics, social tactics. And so a lot of you are probably familiar with these, so I won't spend too much time on this, but naming that birth control sabotage includes things of contraceptive, birth control. So it's not just pregnancy, right? So it's people's ability. And a lot of people use birth control for a lot of different reasons too. There's been so many articles I've seen come out about restrictions to people for medications for people who have autoimmune disorders. And it's not to cause an abortion, but they might have effects on someone's pregnancy. And so they've been unable to access those medications. So that's why this issue is so expansive. It's not just for people who can even have birth or of age to give birth. So I just wanted to continue to name that. But birth control sabotage, one that's really interesting is when I go into high schools or even middle schools, but it's mostly high schools, and I talk about, I don't use the words birth control sabotage because that's just not the way that teenagers think about what they experience. But when you describe and explain certain behaviors, they're like, oh yeah, like stealthing is one that comes to mind, where a lot of people in the classroom, a lot of kids are saying, oh yeah, I know about that. Like I have had a friend where their partner took a condom off without them knowing, and they found out after the fact. And it was agreed upon before that they would engage in sex with a condom. And so those are examples. And on that very first slide, I can go back to it super quick. It talked about how 1 in 8 sexually active high school girls had experienced reproductive coercion within the last 3 months of when that survey was conducted. And so this is something that, young children and teens are being exposed to and experiencing pretty early on in their life too. And so when we're talking about primary prevention and comprehensive sex education, that's where we know that it's really important and really vital. And pregnancy pressure is another one too. So this is forcing or threatening someone to become pregnant or to carry to term. to be a surrogate. I think that's one that a lot of people don't always think about too, is surrogacy, or terminating pregnancy against their wishes. And pregnancy outcome control, sometimes those overlap a lot for me, pregnancy pressure and pregnancy outcome control. But this can include, right, those physical, economic, and emotional tactics to prevent someone from obtaining an abortion, or keeping a desired pregnancy. And so physically harming someone to continue a pregnancy, to induce a miscarriage, all of those things can fall under that realm. And that's not something that's uncommon that we see at the shelter, is people experiencing a miscarriage because they were physically assaulted by a family member or a partner. Other tactics too can include, again, that threatening of, I'm going to hurt myself, or I'm going to hurt someone else in your family if this desired pregnancy outcome isn't realized. So again, there can be insults, degradation, threats to out, of saying, oh, if you do get an abortion, I'm going to tell your disapproving family that you did, and you're not going to have a support system, and you're going to be really isolated. And so that feeds into the social norms that Sarah was talking about earlier, of how these threats are really effective, because a lot of us do live in a culture and within our groups and our communities that don't uplift bodily autonomy, and have different perspectives that can make it really scary for someone to even disclose that they have had an abortion or have sought birth control. So kind of comparing that to reproductive autonomy. And so with research, as I've talked about, there's this development and validation of a reproductive autonomy scale. And this is a study that happened in 2014. So again, if you're interested, I'll put that in the chat as well too. And so they thought of, so you'll see in blue all of these things that contribute to what they define as reproductive autonomy. So self-efficacy as the belief in one's ability to decide about and control matters related to contraceptive use, pregnancy, and childbearing. And then decision-making power, they thought of this as having primary say, either alone or with a partner in such matters, and a communication ability as feeling comfortable talking with one's partner regarding such matters. So equitable gender role attitudes were conceptualized as holding a perception that men and women and people of all genders can have equal sexual and reproductive responsibilities, needs, and desires. And then that last one, management of coercion, was conceptualized as having the ability to avoid and or respond appropriately to coercion regarding contraceptive use, pregnancy, and childbearing. That one kind of makes me feel weird, like management of coercion, just kind of like feels a little weird to me, because again, it's putting the onus on that person rather than the perpetrator. Like, maybe don't be coercive, but with this of what do you have control over, maybe your reaction to experiencing coercion. But this is just something to keep in mind. Of there have been some studies, again, this was in 2014, that was quite a while ago in my brain, in terms of being able to keep up to date of like what reproductive autonomy means to us in this day and age. But these are some of the items, of some of the questions. And again, you can see, I mentioned earlier of it being a lot of the absence of reproductive coercion indicates the presence of reproductive autonomy. There are some more questions at the bottom that are more kind of open-ended. But they found a lot of really interesting results from this study. So again, the link is in the chat if you want to learn more about that scale and what they learned from it. And so cruising along, sorry, there's a lot of content, so if it feels like I'm rushing, please let me know, but I had a lot to say about this. And so one thing that we talk a lot about within the advocacy world is holistic safety, right? And what are the components of holistic safety? And so, right, the textbook definition of safety is a state of being free from harm or danger. And so holistic safety refers to the presence of internal, external, and relational. And so I want to kind of apply this safety model to being able to promote reproductive autonomy and think of it from that lens of how do we promote external safety for survivors or for clients or for people who've experienced sexual assault to be able to obtain the reproductive health care services that they need. And so some can be like being able to be in a physically safe environment. And so that can pertain to when you're actually obtaining reproductive health care. Being able to improve that could be having someone with you to attend and accompany you while going to that healthcare clinic. Again, knowing where to physically go if something happens. So again, that external safety piece of where can this person go? What is their bodily safety? Internal safety too is like, I think about reproductive autonomy. You're able to make decisions about your own reproductive health while not being in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, like not having your sympathetic nervous system completely activated because you're making, decisions and choices in survival mode. You're not internally saved. And being able to act from our window of tolerance, right? Of like not being hyper aroused or hypo aroused, being able to feel that sense of inner safety to make those decisions going forward. Because if you don't feel internally safe, and you're making decisions for yourself, and that's also kind of coercive, right? Because you're not operating from the belief that you will be safe in making certain decisions. And so that also can be related to that emotional safety piece of being able to be emotionally open with people around us. And relational safety, that's something that all of us as preventionists, as providers can help promote with survivors and people who are seeking support of having, being able to be reliable, being able to be trustworthy, being able to hold space for them. And so I just want you all to maybe think about what ways that organizations, systems, and policies can contribute to holistic safety that promotes survivors' reproductive autonomy. And I think that's something that I can just speak for myself. A lot of the advocacy is focused on, physical safety of we want to make sure that the survivor isn't being physically assaulted or sexually assaulted. And I do think that is very important, but I think we can, broaden that conversation about what are other safety considerations as it pertains to your own reproductive health or your holistic health and wellness as well too. And I'll pause if anyone has any questions at this point or any thoughts about thinking about holistic safety within this way and how holistic safety can be a conduit for reproductive autonomy. Okay. If not, we'll go ahead and continue. So I'm going to launch a poll. So this poll is about level of prevention. And so all of you are probably very familiar with this, but I'll go over it very quickly. This is very much a public health model of the upstream downstream approach. It's about like babies being in the river, right? Like, why are all the babies floating down the river? And the questions of like, oh, we need to tend to the babies who are floating down the river, tertiary, or like, being able to care for them more long-term. And then that immediate response is, let's take care of these babies. And then why are the babies floating down the river in the first place? And so that's kind of that model. And so I'm curious to know what prevention level you focus on. A lot of people are putting in the poll that primary prevention makes a lot of sense. 38% so far are saying all three, and 10% are saying tertiary. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, share that. So for the level of prevention that you just selected in the poll, I'm curious what specific ideas you have or already implement that work to prevent reproductive coercion specifically. So maybe we'll start with people who focus on primary prevention. Does anyone have anything that they believe they do that prevents reproductive coercion? So people are talking about consent, healthy relationships. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one thing too of sometimes like students in high school or middle school are surprised when I say like, you have a right to your body, right? Like introducing the idea of bodily autonomy is something that is new, right? Is like not something that we're always taught. Sometimes we're taught like I remember when I was a kid, we were taught about like our no-no square, or like there's certain parts that like are private to you that shouldn't be touched, but that was kind of the extent of the conversation. It didn't expand into other things that we talk about today in terms of like unwanted hugs or like other unwanted touches or other things that make people feel unsafe in their body, and being able to listen to those internal alarm bells that are saying this is not okay, and being able to say, oh, I actually get to set boundaries. I get to let people know what's not okay without fear of retaliation. And that's not always a reality for children, for people of all ages. What about people who do secondary prevention, who provide those immediate responses? Other people in the chat are saying reproductive health, healthy relationships, communication, consent, active bystander intervention, setting boundaries. And then tertiary. Does anyone have any thoughts about those long-term, being able to prevent reproductive coercion in the long term? I think that sometimes when we get to those more like systematic levels and things that we're talking about more on a government level as well. Okay, well, I have some ideas. So these are some of the ideas that I came up with. So a lot of you already mentioned them. So for primary prevention, having inclusive, healthy relationship skills taught in multiple youth settings. So that's one thing that I've learned being in this role, is it's not enough to just go into one classroom one time and say, oh, great, we're done. We provided a 60-minute presentation that, you know, the students may or may not have been paying attention to. Maybe some were sick and then they're missing out because they weren't there. So having multiple opportunities within various youth settings. So not only in the classroom, but in after school programs or within sports teams and other extracurricular activities are really important to be able to name examples of this is a coercive behavior, because sometimes the question I get a lot from students is, what if I don't know that I'm being abusive? Like, what if this other person just genuinely didn't think that that's what abuse was? So having conversation about the difference between like abuse and coercion, and how it exists on a spectrum, and how there are like big and small ways that can be executed, and being able to respect those boundaries. So not only just setting them, but respecting them for other people. So again, having supportive and affirming school, home, and community environments that reduce those risks and increase buffers against reproductive coercion. And then secondary prevention, kind of thinking about recognition and validation of reproductively coercive experiences and various relationship dynamics, first and foremost, right? Of saying, yes, not only do I believe you, but I acknowledge that this is an issue that can happen and that this is what you experienced, and not saying, oh, like, but you're an adult. Your mom shouldn't be able to tell you what you can or can't do with your body. So you must have wanted this decision if you made that choice. So that is not very validating and supportive, right? So being able to have that acknowledgement. Comprehensive services and safety support planning that promotes reproductive autonomy and address short-term consequences, and also work to prevent additional instances of reproductive coercion. Because if you saw from that first slide, I think it said that each pregnancy, like additional pregnancy that someone has, it increases their risk of experiencing reproductive coercion by 10%. So with having more and more children, there's more and more potential for being able to experience reproductive coercion again. And one thing I want to name too is that in the advocacy world, there's plenty of people who have had the babies that were a result of rape or incest or abuse or coercion, or unplanned or unwanted or unintended. And they're raising their children today, you know, and how do we provide support for, you know, the grieving and that like all of the host of emotions and experiences that happen, and the journey that is, as you're supporting a victim survivor. So that's another thing that I would include in secondary prevention too. And then tertiary, so supportive spaces specifically for people who have experienced reproductive coercion. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist. It comes up in our online survivor support group. We've had folks who have shared that they didn't feel like they had a say over their own reproductive health or decisions in their relationship, because they thought that their life would be ended if they tried to assert their own opinion. And so that's something that we hear of a lot and try to make space for, but we don't have a specific curriculum for holding space for reproductive coercion and the aftermath of that. And what is it like to have your bodily autonomy compromised on a regular basis and by someone who is supposed to love you, supposed to care about you, or says that they do. And also having trauma providers that are trained in understanding reproductive violations. I think that is really huge as well. We have a lot of mental health therapists who come to our trainings and say, wow, I never learned about this in school. And so that's something that can be involved with that tertiary level of prevention. And then abuse intervention and transformation programming that's specific to people who have compromised someone else's reproductive agency. So there's a lot of abuse transformation programs that exist that talk about, consent and things, of course, but being able to say, like, what do you think that impact was for that other person? And that's something that, a lot of the abuse intervention programs focus on, is that sometimes people who cause this harm don't understand the impact of their harm, and increasing their awareness of that can sometimes contribute to them being able to shift their beliefs that this is not okay for me to do. It's not okay for me to resort to any means to get what I want. What this other person wants and their decisions matter as well too. And so I think that is something that can continue to be elevated and uplifted within those programming. I'm looking at the chat. Someone in the chat said, having a solid understanding of services in the area have been very important in my work. I make referrals when reproductive coercion concerns come up with patients, since we don't offer the specific supports at the Red Door Clinic. Yeah, I'm going to have a whole list of that too, and I'm sure that MDH has a lot of really great resources for that too, and that's a great way to be able to support others within your own scope of practice too. So when the title of the presentation talked about levels of reproductive coercion, so I wanted to kind of talk about, this is a typical prevention model that you see, right? The individual, relationship, community, societal. And I wanted to try to apply that to reproductive coercion as well. And so reproductive coercion can happen at an individual level, where someone believes, I have the right to control what happens to someone else's body because I'm in a relationship with this person, or because of my gender identity, or whatever the case is, I get to make decisions for another person because I know best, or because whatever the different beliefs are. So reproductive coercion can happen within that individual level. And then within a relationship, when someone else is involved, being able to do things like poking holes in a condom, or lying about surgical procedures or other things, deceiving people in other ways of, oh, we have this agreed upon birth control method, and then compromising it in some way, as we talked about earlier in the different types of reproductive coercion. So that can happen on a relationship level. On a community level, again, this was mentioned earlier with the social norms, but cultural shame, condemnation, rejection, if someone in the group has an abortion, that can be an example of reproductive coercion on a community level. And then on a societal level, criminalization, the legality, economic, systemic repercussions, if abortion services, which is healthcare, are obtained or sought out. So that can happen on that societal level as well. And I'm curious if anyone has thought of any other examples. And so these are just one. I don't want to crowd the screen too much, but also leave space if other people have other ideas about how they view this model and the different levels and unfortunately opportunities for reproductive coercion to happen. Okay, well, I'll let you all simmer on that. And I'll contrast this with how there are opportunities to promote reproductive autonomy at every level. So going back to that center level individual, thinking about how we as individual people can learn and model for other people attitudes and behaviors that value healthy, respectful, nonviolent relationships that value reproductive autonomy, bodily autonomy of other people. And then on that relationship level, being able to directly, explicitly engage in efforts that respect a partner's right to autonomy, discuss expectations regarding reproductive health, encourage others to provide support if reproductive coercion is witnessed, disclosed, or suspected between partners or people of all genders. Something that I hear a lot of is, we even had the conversation and I said that I don't want kids. And the other person said that they did, and they just thought that they could change their mind, that they could change my mind later on in their relationship. And that's something we actually see a lot of celebrities talk about too. And I won't call any out, but there's a couple that are coming to my mind where they've like explicitly said in interviews, like, I knew that my partner didn't want to have babies, and now I forced them to. You know what I mean? And then everyone's like, oh my God, cute, the baby's so cute, and like kind of ignoring the fact that this person did not want to be a parent, and now they are. And just speaking to like from a personal level of, there is a lot of pressure and expectation, particularly for people who are raised as girls or women, to be like, oh, you must want motherhood, or there's something wrong with you as a person, and you are, you know, like you have to have this biological need and urge to be a mother, and having that expectation on people, and that fuels, you know, decisions of like, oh, I know you didn't want it, but like you'll learn how to be a great mother, or like it's intuitive. And so I just want to put that out there as well too, of like, that is like all of these things, like the words reproductive coercion sound so abstract sometimes to people, but it happens every single day and in all of these everyday ways that are oftentimes really normalized and even expected sometimes. I want to look at the chat, some things are coming up. Some people are talking about how it's really normalized. Absolutely. Some people have finished watching Escaping Polygamy on Hulu, and it goes back to that community perspective. The male leaders of the polygamous groups isolate the women and children from the outside world, so they believe the abuse is normal, is required for salvation, etc. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that. I haven't watched it. Sometimes I try not to engage too much in just watching everything and consuming everything that is, so I have to have boundaries with myself. Otherwise, I'm just like entrenched in like anger, and sometimes that's good. It can mobilize me, but I'll try to watch. It sounds really interesting though, and I think that it's eye-opening for a lot of people who might not have exposure to that. In the chat, others are saying one thing that comes to mind of the previous question about different levels of reproductive coercion is institutional barriers built into the medical system. 100%. Yeah. So policies that require or encourage doctors to consult a birthing person's partner if they want a tubal ligation. Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes into a lot of questions too, of like, what are your rights in a relationship? You know what I mean? Like, what are your rights in a relationship? And that's something that comes up a lot too, and even with like IVF, or, you know, like same-sex couples who are trying to get pregnant. And so those things come up all the time. But yeah, the way that medical systems are set up to kind of not always distribute the power in the person whose body is being affected by these decisions. Someone's asking for my email. I'm gonna send it to them really quick. All right. So the next one is community, and I know we're almost at time. This is the last main slide. So contribute to a cultural shift that sets norms and prioritizes reproductive autonomy rather than control, pressure, judgment, and create spaces to have those conversations. I think I try not to do too many Facebook wars of trying to connect with other people and say, hey, let me show a different perspective, or like, this is really harmful and millions of people have seen this and seem to agree with this. And so that can happen. And what's hard when I'm working in prevention is like, I feel like we don't gather as much, right? Like a lot of times I find myself at churches or other like religious spaces, because that's where people gather. But if you're not belonging to one of those communities, it's tough to have everyone in like a single space of like, how do we engage in these conversations? How do we actually shift a culture when it's not like one person at a time or one small conversation? Like, I remember, this is a bad comparison, but I'll just say it. There was a whole like NPR, they did a whole thing about how, oh, this doctor was at a bar and talked to this person who didn't believe in vaccines. And they're like, whoa, this is how change happens, like one person at a time. And it just is, I think I don't want to discount that or minimize it. I think those interactions are really important, but I think it's going to be really cool to see how the community can really come together. That's why I've tabled at farmers markets before, and people have been like, whoa, I didn't know that there was a shelter right around the corner. I'm just here to get vegetables, but actually my neighbor, I hear them screaming at each other all the time and I have concerns and I didn't know that you existed. So that's like other ways that we can get into the community and start to say like, yeah, this exists, we're here, and being in spaces that maybe aren't traditionally thought of, because that's where you're going to find people who aren't already engaged in this work. Then on the societal level, creating and promoting policies and systems that support the rights of an individual to be an active agent in decisions regarding their own reproductive health, be vocal about the need for legal protections for people of all genders to access full spectrum reproductive health care. This includes abortion care. So I know I'm over time, so I'm going to just click through these super quick. So lots of reproductive justice resources on the left, lots of Minnesota specific resources. We just got a presentation at Women's Advocates from Spiral, which was really great. And they're going to provide abortion care bags to us as well. So we have those for our residents that are in our shelter. And then there's a lot more information on reproductive coercion if you're interested in learning more, and a lot more information about racial considerations when it comes to reproductive coercion, because those are inextricably tied as well. This is some information about how to contact women's advocates. We do have pop-up advocacy in the community. So we're at the Rondo Community Outreach Library every Tuesday, and we're at the Ramsey County WIC and Young American Partnerships office on Thursdays. You can learn more if you click that link in the chat. And then we also have the online survivor support group that I just talked about. Put that in the chat really quick. But otherwise, thank you so much. I'll hand it back over to Julia to close out. But I really, really appreciate everyone being here, and I hope that you learned something or benefited from this portion of the presentation in some way. I included the link to the PowerPoint slides in the chat. You can also scan the QR code. My email is on the screen. I'll put it in the chat too. But thank you all so much, and feel free to follow up with me if you have any other questions or want to chat.
Thank you so much for an absolutely brilliant presentation, Brenniston. I really appreciate how you're able to make some connections to our previous presenters, and this was just a huge wealth of information that was shared today. So I know I'm going to have to go back and watch the recording, and thanks for folks kind of uplifting some celebrations in the chat as well. And so just before we go today, we did just want to open up for any announcements that folks might have. So if folks want to share those in the chat for upcoming trainings or new opportunities, or also feel free to unmute yourself. But in the meantime, I do just want to share one last piece, and we just want to offer up a poll for everyone, just to kind of check in to see what they thought about our SVPN meeting today. So we will launch that here. And Julia, if there's anything else that you wanted to share as well.
I don't personally have anything else to share. I'm looking out for announcements in the chat. I'm just feeling so blown away by everybody. I see it looks like Jasmine has raised a hand, perhaps to share an announcement.
Hi, yeah. Also, thank you everyone for sharing today. That was really awesome to see everyone's like wealth of knowledge about all the things that they're talking about. So I'm glad I was here, and I hope everyone else also has a good rest of their day. Canvas Health is doing a flash sex ed curriculum facilitator training next Monday, August 29th. I'll drop my email in the chat if anyone thinks that they might want to attend. It's going to be prevention focused. Tatum Bishop from Family Tree is going to be leading it. It'll be $60, and it'll just be a one-day thing to get folks ready to go talk to young people about sex ed and healthy relationships and stuff. So shoot me an email if you're interested. We still have a lot of spots open. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Jasmine, I do believe Mencasa shared that out too, but if folks do have any questions, I know that Jasmine said that they were going to share their email as well. I do want to end the poll here 1 second, but I do think there was another question in the chat as well. Bobby's asking, is there any trainings that anyone provides in regards to youth that have been sexually victimized that are grooming others? I work at a residential facility and have noticed this a lot. Would love any info on this piece. Nothing comes to mind for me personally. Julie, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts, or anyone in this space as well.
My thought was potentially to reach out to your regional navigator. I'm not sure what the context is of what you're describing, but talking about grooming and youth, it sounds like there might be some risk there of exploitation or trafficking. So I would say reach out to your local regional navigator, and if you need support finding that person, let us know. We can help you get connected. And the other thing I wanted to just mention, I know we're running a little bit. Oh, thank you, Mary, for posting in the chat how to do that. Looks like Ashley shares Project Pathfinder would be good too. Terrific. Thank you for sharing those resources. And one thing I wanted to mention is we also just want to know what suggestions or requests you have for future SVPN meetings. So please feel free to share your responses in the chat box or send us an email to share your ideas. You've got our contact information here, and we'll be reaching out shortly with the recording for today's presentation, as well as other resources. The email that will go out should include all of the links that are being shared on the chat, those helpful links. And as soon as we get a chance to send that out. And I think that's all of the announcements we have today. Thank you so much to all of the terrific presenters. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us and for staying a couple of minutes late. This was just an absolutely terrific SVPN meeting.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And please reach out if you have any questions other than that. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for being in this space with us.